Sexism, double standard, gender, sex, gender roles. One more time. Any questions on those things? Okay, let's talk about race. There are a number of concepts in this chapter I want you to know. You need to know the difference between race, ethnicity, and minority group. Race, ethnicity, and minority group. Race, ethnicity, and minority group. A racial group is one based upon some physically inheritable characteristic. Some physically inheritable characteristic. A minority group is cultural. A minority group is cultural. An example of an American racial group: African Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, Caucasians. An example of an ethnic group: Irish Americans. Joey talking about being mostly Irish. Italian American, Polish American, Jewish American. They're all white, but those are different ethnic groups. Which one of those concepts, race or ethnicity, is more encompassing and more important according to sociology?
Race?
No. Yeah, what people think about that in this country. No, ethnicity is. Every racial group is an ethnic group based upon cultural differences. But not all racial groups, but not all ethnic groups are racial groups. Ethnicity is the larger category. Every racial group is an ethnic group. But not all ethnic groups are racial groups. And the key part even of a racial group is the culture in back of it. Yes, I know that it means it's physically inheritable and all that kind of stuff. But it is culture that points the finger at which physically inheritable characteristics to pay attention to. In this country, skin color is a big deal. But is that because skin color is biologically more significant than any other inheritable trait? No, it's culture that points the finger at that. Are there societies in which a different physically inheritable trait has been focused on? Yeah, sure. Like physical size. In parts of Africa where there have been pygmies, very short peoples, have they been discriminated on the basis of their physical size? Yes. But probably the best example of how non-physical is this physical notion of race and how it mainly is culture is this racial group. What's the Aryan race? What? Oh, no. No. Not any kind of white person. What kind of white people? Blonde, blue eyes, tall. The master race. Now, does that make any kind of biological sense whatsoever? No. I mean, it's inheritable. More like to have blonde kids if you have two blonde people marry each other. More like to have blonde kids. So it's physically inheritable. Same thing as eye color. It's completely biologically stupid. But did 6 million people lose their lives around that piece of genetic stupidity? Oh yeah. It was even stupid and contradictory on its own grounds, right? Who's the master race? The Aryan, right? Blonde hair, blue eyes, tall. So, who was the big leader? Short guy, brown hair, brown eyes. That's the point. It's culture pointing the finger at some arbitrary, physically inheritable character. It could be eye shape. It could be physical size. It could be nose hair, for all I know. I mean, it's just something physical that's inherited, but culture doesn't say, oh, that's a big deal. Okay. Minority group is either one of those. Gender, race, that is socially identifiable. That is, we know that you're a member of this group. You know you're a member of the group as well. But the key point for sociologists, and this is why this is not Webster's dictionary definition of minority, is that they must be exploited by a dominant group, making this a power relationship, not a numerical one. By that definition, can 80% of a population be a minority group?
Yes.
Yes. And by that definition, was 80% of a population a minority group? Yes, under apartheid in South Africa. 80% of the population of South Africa is black African, 20% whites. But during the era of apartheid, did that 20% exploit the hell out of the overwhelming majority of that population? Sure did. And did that make them a minority group in their own country? Yep. It's a power relationship. Okay. Next, in terms of these concepts, okay, any questions on these? Most of this stuff is pretty simple. This is not complicated stuff. Some of it's controversial in its implications, the notion of ethnicity being more important than race, but not complicated. Yeah?
You said you said race can have culture, but...
Yeah, no, it's the other way around. Every racial group is an ethnic group, but not all ethnic groups are racial groups. Okay? So are African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans also ethnic groups? Yeah, sure. Distinct cultural style, distinct way of life. But in this culture, people point the finger at skin color and make those into separate races. Yes?
Would you say that there are any ethnic groups in any cultures based on economic status?
Can be, sure. Yeah, you can have an ethnic group. In in England, for example, traditionally there's been an awful lot of class segregation, even on the basis of how people speak. In England, you can tell someone's class by the way they speak. Cockney versus the upper class accent. And then in that sense, that is an ethnic group, but it's based on economics. In that sense, again, it's cultural. Culture is pointing the finger at this point at the economics underlying that, or the way that you actually speak the language. Everybody understands everybody else, but that Cockney accent, come on, governor, versus, oh, we are from the plains of Eton, no, that's kind of deep. You can tell someone's class in England by the way they speak. Yes?
Can't race and ethnicity also be defined by past traditions as well as just the past culture of the society?
That's the point. What you just said is that all of those are ethnic divisions because it's based on culture. Whether it's culture today or the weight of culture over history, it's still culture. So you just, yeah, exactly. It's exactly what you've been saying. A couple quick points. I don't know if this is in the book or not. History of race relations in the United States. You should be aware of two major Supreme Court decisions. We have a horrible history of slavery in this country and the treatment of Native Americans. And then, once that stuff ended, we had an almost equally bad system called the Jim Crow period of over 100 years. Jim Crow laws were those separate laws for particularly African Americans, but also applying to Latinos and even Asians as well. Separate, the notion was separate but equal. That practice was established in 1898 by the U.S. Supreme Court in a decision called Plessy versus Ferguson. It says separate was okay as long as it was equal. It was always separate. It was never equal. That legal basis of that was ended about a half century later in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Okay. Another distinction you should be aware of, prejudice versus discrimination. Again, most people know this stuff. It's pretty common sense, but let's make sure we're all on the same page. Prejudice is a psychological state, a set of beliefs, attitudes. Discrimination is practice, a behavior. So, prejudice is belief, discrimination is practice. The usual relationship is obvious that if you don't like somebody, you take some action against them. Prejudice leads to discrimination. That's the usual relationship. But is it a necessary relationship? Which means that does it always follow that if you have prejudice, you have discrimination? No. You can have prejudice without discrimination. It just means somebody hates somebody, but they don't do anything about it. In this country, for example, is it illegal to be prejudiced? No. You have every right to be as stupid as you want. But on the other hand, is it illegal to discriminate? Yes, it is. So we know there's more prejudice out there than there is discrimination in that regards because they're stopped from doing what they would like to do by law.
Has there ever been any cases of discrimination without prejudice?
Absolutely. That was going to be the next question. Can you get discrimination without prejudice? It looks like impossible, right? Yep, you can. Yep, you can. One source of this, and probably the easiest to see, is where you have what is called institutionalized discrimination. That is, institutions have been created that discriminate against people, whether people inside those institutions are prejudiced or not. Jim Crow laws. Let's go back to those. That's why I raised that. Jim Crow law is simply a law saying you must discriminate. If you were a restaurant owner in Alabama in 1908, but you yourself were not prejudiced, and you tried to serve a black person at the same table that white people ate at, what would happen to you?
You'd be arrested.
You'd be, not beat up, no, you'd be arrested, and they close down your business because you violated a law. Now, were those people forced to discriminate even though they themselves were not prejudiced? Yes. That is what's called institutionalized discrimination, where the force of history, past cultural practices may also be enacted. That is, you're part of a group of people, you just grew up in it. You know, you don't really hate Jews, but everybody else around you does, and you go along. Not because you hate them, but just because you're kind of a conformist to the dominant culture. Well, everybody else is doing it. We've already talked about that, in that strong human desire to conform. Bah. So, again, that's kind of institutionalized, but in this case, in not just law, but in culture. Institutionalized discrimination. Institutionalized, sometimes called racism. The book uses the term institutionalized racism. Okay. Where does this come from? Let me throw one that's not in the books. I do want you to hear about this. Remember, prejudice is an emotional state, a psychological state, and attitude, which is why a lot of the explanations have come from psychology. Probably the most famous single psychological explanation for prejudice came from a German, but Jewish, social psychologist by the name of T.W. Adorno. He studied anti-Semitism back in the 1940s. Uh-oh. In other words, what was he studying? The Holocaust. Very personal for Adorno, as I said, because he was both German and Jewish. He's one of the few German Jews after the war who survived and was not made into soap, and went back to Germany and did what he was before. He was a university professor before the war and the Holocaust. He went back and did it again. But he then studied the people who got attracted to the Nazi Party, to the haters. The people so horrendously prejudiced against Jews. And the term for this is called anti-Semitism. And what he found was the people who were attracted to the Nazi parties, these haters, shared a set of psychological characteristics in common. They were fairly simplistic thinkers. That is, almost childlike. The world was divided into good guys and bad guys for them. They were highly ethnocentric towards all groups, not just Jews. It wasn't just Jews that Nazis hated. Gypsies, gays, mentally ill, anybody who politically disagreed with them, Asians, Africans. As a matter of fact, anybody that didn't sound German, they didn't like. It's kind of like a little child. Those two are connected. Give a little kid something at 5 years old they've never had before. What are they going to say? I don't want it. How come? I don't like it. Have you ever had it before? No. How do you know you don't like it? I don't like it. And that's kind of what we're talking about here.